Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini. As always, I'm joined by my colleague and fellow Maple Leaf writer over at the Hockey Writers, Shane Seney. Shane, still a lot of news to talk about because when we last recorded, we were talking about the Jake McCabe trade. A lot more has happened, a lot of games played, and also a lot of news and noteworthy stuff to get to with the Maple Leafs. But first off, how are you doing?
Doing great. Nice start to a week for me this Monday. It was busy, but happy to meet up with you and chat some Leafs. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. And we're going to go right into it right now. Obviously, the biggest news in Leafs Nation right now is Ryan O'Reilly took a shot off his hand mid-game during their matchup against the Vancouver Canucks. He did not return, was seen wearing a splint on his index finger, sorry if I mispronounced that. But they said that they were going to give Warden an update on Monday. It is now Monday, and we have news. He's going to be out for at least a minimum of 10 games. That is roughly in between 2 to 4 weeks, and is eligible to return at the earliest March 29th to the team. Shane, obviously a huge blow for the Maple Leafs, considering that he was one of their important pickups during this trade deadline. Obviously it's not an ideal situation, but what do you make of it? And is this something that the Maple Leafs can get through?
Yeah, what kind of stands out for me here is the fact that he's going to be back before the playoffs, so no need to panic, nothing to worry about. It's his fingers, so he can still skate, he can still work on his conditioning. When it comes to foot speed, that's not Ryan O'Reilly's number one suit. He's a player that outthinks and outsmarts the other team. And he can still do that kind of stuff while he's, working through this rehab. So to me, it's not a big deal. Obviously, it's not ideal because you want him playing these last 19 games down the stretch, working on some chemistry, those kind of things. But for me, they'll have, 4 or 5 games here once he gets back, get everybody sorted, get the line sorted, kind of figure out what role they want him to play in that first round series. And then, let's see what happens, but not ideal. You can't really, fault the guy for standing in front, trying to block the goalie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like you said, it's not the worst. Like, obviously this is probably best case scenario. It's not the worst thing that can happen. Obviously you don't want it to happen and it's not ideal as you mentioned, but it does put a hamper on everything because it just kind of seems like, as you probably saw on social media today, everyone was already in a panic, already in freak out mode because of the fact that, we go out, we make all these moves, and then all of a sudden you see Matthews block a shot. We'll get to that later on. Tavares gets hit, is going to be scratched for the game against the New Jersey Devils. Then you see this, and it's just like this team is most likely definitely cursed, and that's what everyone is pointing to with their reaction. But I do agree, and I think like you mentioned, he is going to be eligible to return beforehand, and even Sheldon Keefe alluded to that, where he said to lose him is certainly tough and disappointing, but we acquired him to be healthy and ready to go through the playoffs, and that will be the case. He then later adds on, we'll see how it goes, but I expect he'll get a good chunk of regular season action. We'll get him back and running as soon as we can. And that is from updated article from Maple Leafs Notes by Luke Fox over at Sportsnet. And the main thing is, ideally not great, but considering that he is going to be back before the playoffs start, where he can still get his feet wet and get ready for when the game time comes for those meaningful games, I think that's going to be important. And not only that, I think it's a good, this is probably the most adversity that the Maple Leafs will have faced since the beginning of the season, where they had those struggles defensively, winning games and everything like that. But right now, they've been in this spot before where, a really good player in the top 6 goes down and everybody needs to step up. And I think Sheldon Keefe and the players know what needs to be done. So expect everybody to play a more important role. Obviously, Sam Lafferty was given that spot on the top 6 for now. We'll see what he does. We'll see what Noel Chari brings. We'll see what everybody else can do, because that's going to be huge without the presence of Ryan O'Reilly.
For sure. And two, they have a lot of center depth. So not a position that they're very thin on. So the panic in Leafs Nation is quite comical sometimes. And this would be one of those times. This would be one of those times.
Absolutely. And I just want to get your thoughts too. As I mentioned, during the line rushes, Sam Lafferty was on that top 6. What do you make of that? Because obviously he was brought in to be that third bottom 6 energy kind of player with his speed. But do you think with that ability to try and keep up with Nylander, will that sort of have a good impact on that line, considering where they are right now?
For sure. I think you hit the nail there when you said speed. I think that's what impressed Keefe the most so far. So I think he's an offensive instinct, minded player. It's not like he's completely sold on defense and just getting the puck in deep and make sure that, he's not losing his guy. I think he can play in an offensive role and as an injury replacement. So this is a perfect opportunity for him to kind of, see what he's got. He's got 10 or 11 goals on the year. It's not like he's not able to find the back of the net. So Nylander's been playing great. His vision's off the charts. So you can put, basically anybody on his wing or on his line, and they'll have some chances. So for me, it's a great opportunity for him. And you know what? He seems like he's, a lot of people like him, not just the coach, but the players have been talking, they're pretty impressed, and he's around for next year too, as of right now, and maybe longer, who knows. But I think that was, an under the radar addition for Dubas that is going to have huge and lasting impacts on this team.
Absolutely. And as we go from, a number of acquisitions that we talked about to the big one that was done before the trade deadline, and Leaf fans got their wish. They wanted a reunion with Luke Schenn, and we finally got that, as he was acquired for, I believe, a 3rd round pick in 2023 to the Vancouver Canucks. Shane, obviously he was brought in to be another steady presence, especially on that right-hand side, but be a little bit more physical and provide that sort of intimidation factor that they weren't going to be pushed around. Obviously he got into a few games, is now on baby watch as his wife is expecting their 3rd child, I believe. He's back in Vancouver training while the Leafs are on the road. But from what you saw with Luke Schenn's game so far, obviously we're well accustomed to the way that he can play, but how impactful has it been for the Maple Leafs? And not only that, I believe he was also playing with Morgan Riley at times too. So what did you make of his initial presence or his first few games with the Maple Leafs?
I thought it was great. I thought he was exactly what the doctor ordered. They not a physical bunch. So he just looks for the hit, and he looks to just lay out guys every shift, and they haven't had that in quite some time, especially on the back end. So for me, he's coming in, he's only playing like 12, 13 minutes the first couple games. And in Vancouver, there were some nights he was, pushing 20 minutes. So for him to come in and kind of solidify his role on the 3rd pair, I don't think he's going to play top 4 minutes or anything, but I think he's going to push a guy like Justin Hall out of the lineup when it comes to playoff time. And he'll really get, a better run on the penalty kill once he's back with the team and can get himself situated. But for me, he's been everything as advertised those first 2 games. I think he's got 7 hits, and you know what? He's a presence out there. He's a human eraser. What do you mean? There's no other human eraser in the NHL. So when you say that, everybody knows Luke Schenn, and he's been great for the Leafs so far.
Yeah, as you already mentioned, 7 hits in 2 games so far. And I think the big thing is, like you said, his physical presence and his tenacity is obviously that's why the Maple Leafs drafted him initially, to be that intimidating factor. Obviously, development got derailed, management kind of rushed him, but now he's back into form of what he's supposed to be in the NHL. And I think that's very key. And like you said, he always goes for the hit, making a big, just a bone crushing hit every single time. And as we saw against the Vancouver Canucks, as we saw against the Calgary Flames too, mixing it up and just being a real pain to go up against his front of the net too, just clear bodies out. That's the main thing. And, the one thing that I take from his physical style is, I've talked about this with many people before, and even I've even talked with one guy, Tony Ferrari from the Hockey News, when we talk about prospects or players, the difference between making a hit for the sake of making a hit and getting caught, or making it timely and not getting caught. Luke Schenn is doing the latter part or the former part of making a timely hit, not getting caught or putting anybody in a bad situation just for the sake of making a hit. And that is very huge right now, especially when it comes to playoff time, where you got to be on your heels every single time, because if you make a hit and you're out of position and it leads to an odd man rush, that's going to hurt you big time. And as we've seen that with some other defenders, whether not even so much as Justin Hall with a hit, but making a poor timely pinch, Schenn knows his awareness and how the situation is going to unfold. So I think that having that steady presence on the back end is going to be very critical.
One thing to look out too, like when it comes to scrums after whistles and stuff, there's so many times where the whistle blows and everybody just skates back to the bench.
Mm-hmm.
But with Schenn, when he's out there, you're going to see guys get pushed, guys get pissed off, guys engage. And he's the kind of guy that really pulls players into that kind of stuff, like a Michael Bunting or, Noel Acciari. They don't have a ton of this. So it's really the perfect element for the team to hopefully take them over the hump.
Exactly. And again, just absolutely throw that Schenn is back in a Maple Leaf uniform. You saw the fans loved it. You saw how well, like, seeing that number 2 in blue and white, it just brings back flashbacks to 2008 when he was drafted. So very, very great moment for him. And obviously best wishes to both him and his wife. As we move on to our third point, and we've kind of alluded to this too with the injuries happening to Ryan O'Reilly and how that may impact the chemistry or performance of the team. And earlier this evening, Mark Masters tweeted out a quote from Sheldon Keefe in regards to new players coming in and impacting performance and the chemistry, and how maybe it's taking a little bit of time if it's impacting their poor play. And Sheldon had this to say: the more time that passes, we will get better as a group, but to put performance on any of the changes or the players that have come in is just letting us off the hook too easy, frankly. And Shane, we know how many times, they try to use the playbook, we got to be at our best. They try to not necessarily find excuses, but they find a way around it to say, hey, maybe we weren't that great. But is Sheldon Keefe in the right saying that, despite the new additions, the poor play, there's no correlation to that whatsoever?
I believe so. Yeah. I think with the additions happening on a road trip, they can jump right in. There is some familiarity there with a couple of the players, and certain guys have different types of relationships. Like Michael Bunting is, his volleyball coach was Ryan O'Reilly's aunt, and like little things like that where you just break the ice. It's easy to talk to guys, easy to get to know them on and off the ice. So for me, chemistry is not an issue at all. They were decent as far as like that third period against Calgary. That's the best hockey and best shutdown hockey this team has played in almost a decade. So I don't think there's any concerns. They got 19 games left to work on the chemistry. Guys they're just finding a story to write about. Personally, that's what I think. I don't really think it's an issue at all. I think that it's being overblown, and good on Coach Sheldon Keefe to kind of nip it in the butt ahead of time. And you know what? We'll see. They got a homestand coming up, and the Leafs do it different. Like, they're so attention to detail from start to finish of the day, off days, nutrition, rehab, whatever. They're the cream of the crop. So anybody worried about chemistry of this team should find something else to talk about.
No, I do agree. I think it's just maybe one talking point where maybe it can play a factor, but I think with the way this team has made additions in the past, deadlines, what have you, they're no stranger to making these kind of deals and bringing in new players. Like even last year, I thought with the addition of both Ilya Lyubushkin and Mark Giordano and Colin Blackwell, they acclimated to the team very quickly. So that's not really an excuse right now, considering how many impactful players that you got right now with O'Reilly, Acciari, McCabe, Lafferty, Schenn. You basically essentially went above and beyond from the players that you brought in last year. So there really should be no excuses in terms of the chemistry. And even so, you've already played against all these players. You know the type of mentality that they have, and especially recently with McCabe and Lafferty, because they were 2 times in the span of 2 weeks in a week where the Maple Leafs played the Chicago Blackhawks. So you're really familiar with both McCabe and Lafferty right then and there. Obviously, you've seen Luke Schenn quite a bit in the past. He's been on this team before, even though it was pre-Auston Matthews era. But I do agree. Yeah, chemistry, it does take a while for it to get into the comfort zone of the players. But I think at the same time, considering where they're at right now, considering how motivated they should be right now, chemistry should, or that storyline should not be a main factor.
I want to add too, Peter, is the fact that these are depth pieces. This isn't a top line winger. This isn't a starting goalie coming in. These are additions. There's already a core in place here. So that just adds another element to the fact that there shouldn't be a ton of pressure on these guys. And I know there is, but they're there just to play a role, and it shouldn't be, chemistry is not a big deal here.
Absolutely. And as we reach the halfway point of our show, this episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Hockeypedia. Have you ever been looking for details on a team's player list? Do you want to know about Maple Leaf Stanley Cup history? Yes, just get the 1967 jokes out of the way in the comment section below. We already know about it. Who is in the 2015 Stanley Cup playoffs? What are the NHL awards and what's their history? If you're interested in these or any other hockey questions, make sure you check out and bookmark the Hockey Writers Hockeypedia page. It's an ever-growing collection of hockey resources that is invaluable to any fan looking for information. Look for a link in the show description and dive in today. All right, as we got through the major news and notes out of the way in regards to O'Reilly, Schenn, post-game or pre-game comments in regards to the New Jersey Devils, let's go back to the game against the Vancouver Canucks because, oh man, we've talked about too many times, Shane, about Maple Leafs playing down their competition again. This basically took it to a whole nother level. Obviously, the Maple Leafs have a great first period against the Canucks, didn't get a goal, but they dominated the play. Then they sit back in the second period, kind of bounce back in the third where they tie it up, but then that's when things start to fall apart. And if I'm looking at the game score correctly, John Tavares tied the game up after Andrei Kuzmenko got the first goal in the second period. And then I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off right now. Not one, but two shorthanded goals against on a power play for the Maple Leafs to try and take the lead in that game. Shane, not so much about playing down to the competition, but just how bad is that situation to be in for the Maple Leafs, considering what you have in terms of the power play and the firepower that you have with, Tavares on the first one gave up a really bad turnover that put Morgan Rielly in a bad spot, but Rielly didn't quite read that play well either. And then literally 9-10 seconds later, JT Miller scores again on that same power play, shorthanded. What do you make of that? And is there cause for concern for the power play right now?
I believe so. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of the setup. I wish they kind of would go back to looking for Matthews on that one timer and then just kind of working off the rebound and seeing what's made out of it from there. To me, like Morgan Rielly is not a weapon or a threat on the power play. He's a glorified back passer at this point, and I think he doesn't look for his slap shot enough. He's, oftentimes it's an off balance wrist shot that's barely, and even a threat to the goalie. So for me, I would think about, what other options they have there as far as just a setup, even if Rielly stays on the first unit, just kind of mixing it up to see like, let's not always look for the drop pass, and let's try and look for either Nylander or Matthews one timer across seam, and work the high low with Tavares, who I think he was like he used to kill that one timer, that little quick bumper pass that was being used. So they've looked at different setups, and just right now whatever they have is not working. So they need to figure it out, because it's never a good thing when you're minus on a power play differential when it comes to goals.
I could go into major length on why the Maple Leafs need to just stop doing the drop pass on the power play, but that's for a different episode when we get to it. I agree. I think that the movement hasn't quite been there at times, and even so, but the difference is, we saw the movement in the game against the Calgary Flames, how it was quick. They didn't score because we know how good Jacob Markstrom is, but they were effective with their movement. They were finding each other very well, crisp passes, smart with their decision-making. And then you have the complete opposite of that game with the Canucks, where, they seem a little bit not necessarily intimidated, but they feel kind of rushed and trying to, play behind, try and get back up to speed. And then that's when the mistakes start to kick in with all these back drop passes, blind passes. And we've seen that too many times, especially in the playoffs. We know what happened in that series against the Montreal Canadiens in games 5 and 6, I believe. Those were 2 crucial bad plays that led to game-winning goals. I just think that they need to. There are times where they're completely dominant and times where they're completely passive. And this was one of those times where they're completely passive or just wasn't quite connecting. And it really shouldn't happen considering what you have on there. And obviously we talk about their woes and everything like that and the struggles that they're having. They really need to try and figure things out, especially when, although they have been, connecting on the power plays, it's just that there are power plays for a string for 2 or 3 where they're good, 2 or 3 where they're bad, one in between kind of thing. They just need to find that consistency and just be a little bit better. And like you said about getting shots off quickly, I think they need to try and utilize Matthews more, even though they're taking away the lanes. There's always going to be an option for him or somewhere to utilize him perfectly because he is one of the elite goal scorers in the league. Morgan Rielly, or they need to have a shot on that back end to get pucks on net for those second, third opportunities. Whether you still try to use Rielly, whether you try to use Liljegren or McCabe for that matter, because they could get pucks on net. Who knows what can happen, but I do believe that there is some cause for concern and hopefully they can try and figure things out because when you give up 2 shorthanded goals, it is not pretty at all. Moving on to our final topic, actually, and this still revolves around Auston Matthews, and we already talked about the injury to Ryan O'Reilly, but, minutes or way before O'Reilly got injured, everyone took a big collective breath or a sigh of relief because Auston Matthews blocked a shot and kind of, again, put Maple Leaf fans in a frenzy. Left the bench, didn't return until the start of the third period or minutes in, where he was able to come back. He blocked a shot, I believe it was from Noah Juleson, who initially took the shot. Matthews was in pain. He got up on his own accord, but didn't return. And that's where it kept Maple Leaf fans in the dark. Did return. Obviously, it stung him a little bit. He talked about how it was very uncomfortable, but he still managed to find a way to pull through. Going to the fact that, fans should say that players should, or star players shouldn't be blocking shots like that or getting involved in the play or trying to help the team win. Obviously, it wasn't ideal for Auston Matthews because he's blocked many shots this season and been fairly well knocked or been on the good side of things where he hasn't been or faced a bad shot where he was on a bad angle and he blocked it perfectly. Should Matthews or any of the star players continue to block shots? But then again, you don't just need one person to go out there. It needs to be a whole team effort.
Yes. They're paid a lot of money to play hockey. And blocking shots is part of the deal that comes with winning a championship, right? So you got to do whatever you can to help the goaltender and not screen him, of course. But if you can get in those lanes and make it hard for teams to get pucks through, you're going to win a lot more hockey games than you lose. So anybody that's ripping Matthews for blocking shots, I don't know, that's a head scratcher to me. But he's trying to he's engaged in the game. He's not the one-dimensional player that, a lot of people think he is. He's a guy that doesn't need to put up points to have an impact on the hockey game. And that's how you know the great ones from the good ones. So to me, don't worry about it. Yes, there's a chance he can get injured, but you could say that about every hit and every shot. So to me, just keep doing what they're doing. He's, making an impact, and come playoff time, that's when this kind of stuff comes out the most. So for me, you're happy he's not hurt, but again, let's hope he's in front of that next shot.
I'm going to throw, obviously, I'm looking at the stats right now. Auston Matthews has 78, but I'm just going to throw this out there, Shane. The next forward to have the most blocked shots on the Maple Leafs, who do you think that is?
I will say Kerfoot.
You are absolutely right. It is Alex Kerfoot with 39. So there's a big difference between this. Okay, Shane, you could flex your muscles on that guess right there, but you could flex that. But at the same time, it's just interesting to see how much of a gap there is between the next forward of the Maple Leafs, where Auston Matthews, your star top line centers has 78 block shots, and then not so much after that. Obviously, Mitch Marner is very timely. He has 35, the next one behind Kerfoot. He's not getting into the lanes as well, but he's more using his stick actively to try and break things up. And obviously, he does get in the shots. And there was one time where he did block it and kicked it out, or I can't remember what game it was, but he was so happy, or the bench was so happy with that. You could hear the laugh and excitement from them on that block shot from Marner, that it was absolutely great. So like you said, the players are paid big bucks. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's your star player, depth player, whatever. They need to get in those lanes. And, those timely blocks can lead to not a turnover, but, a chance going the other way where it's an odd man rush. And the Maple Leafs have been great on capitalizing on those in the past. So let's hope that the block shot issue is not a main concern. Obviously, big breath, because, it did get Matthews in an area where there is no padding, and he's usually, straight with the shooter, getting into the lane and keeping his feet straight. But we'll see what happens. But then again, I agree with you how, everybody, not just depth players, should be blocking shots.
For sure. And the crazy part about Matthews, Peter, is the fact he doesn't kill penalties. And he's got that many shot blocks, right? So
on 5-on-5,
it's all 5-on-5. So yeah, kudos to him. He's taking his game to new heights this year, and just not everybody realizes that it's not always when the goal horn goes off.
Absolutely. And that is all the time that we have for this episode of Maple Leafs Lounge. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to check out the Hockey Writers Hockeypedia page. You'll see a link in the description for all the information that you require on the NHL, teams, players lists, you name it. You'll find it over at the Hockeypedia page. Once again, that is it for this episode. For Shane Seney, I'm Peter Baracchini, and we'll see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.